The flood disaster in Pakistan, international aid with no strings attached? We'll be talking to the former German ambassador to Pakistan, Gunter Mulack.
Dr. Mulack, the United Nations has called the floods in Pakistan a disaster of historic proportions. 20 million people homeless, 1,600 dead, and the weather experts tell us that the monsoon rains are likely to continue for several weeks yet, so presumably the worst is not over. I want to begin by asking you, to what extent do you think that this is simply a natural disaster, and to what extent could this immense human tragedy have been avoided?
Well, it is a human tragedy. It is a biggest disaster, the biggest flood at least during the last decades which Pakistan has to face. I think it could have been avoided probably if one had built properly the old dams, which still date from the British time, when the Brits have used the Punjab for agricultural purposes and built a lot of these dams, but they have never been really renovated. And also the logging mafia in the north, cutting all the trees, has definitely also been one of the reasons why all the water and the rubble went down to the rivers, and then again creating havoc at the dams which have been erected afterwards. So I think there is a lot of man-made fault or mistakes in this disaster.
Well, the Pakistani government appeared initially to be either paralyzed or in denial. I mean, President Zardari, when the floods were rising, the floodwaters rising, actually travelled to Britain and held political conferences there, and then he flew off to France to see his luxurious chateau in France. What kind of leadership is that?
Yeah, this is really a leadership which is unfortunately typical for Pakistan. It is an upper class of feudalists, of people who have been raised at foreign universities, foreign schools, and who are totally disconnected from the masses, I mean from their own people, who speak perfectly English, who know London and Paris probably better than some of the villages in Punjab or Sindh, I'm afraid to say.
This week, let me quote you, the British Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, said, "The response from the international community as a whole, I have to say, has been lamentable. It's been absolutely pitiful." Why is that?
Well, why is that? Because we had so many huge human disasters happening during this year and last year. If you think of Haiti and before, at the earthquake in 2005, the help was flowing in much faster, for example, and therefore, and it was probably also underestimated the dimensions of this flooding, because in the beginning we just spoke about Swat and some other valleys, and then the area around Peshawar, and then it started to flow down, and now we only see how huge the effects are, how negative the effects are on really vaster parts of the population. But I think that now things are going much better, and it always takes, this is what I have learned, it always takes at least a week or 10 days before the actors of assistance really become efficient in helping on the spot. And the country is far away, it's a big country also.
But we've had now these floods for 3 weeks, and meteorologists told us that the weather system meant that the monsoon rains that normally hit the Indian coast were going to move up and hit the Pakistani territory with full force. Now, I'm not a floods expert, but even I know that you're going to need helicopters to reach the people, because streets and roads and the bridges will be. Why wasn't the West prepared?
Yeah, because also we were probably not being asked by the Pakistanis at a very short notice that this might develop into a huge catastrophe, but also because after all the political involvements, Taliban fighting, Swat Valley, these were the same areas which were affected by the floodings. Also the security factor was there. I think really we have underestimated this this huge flooding and the whole situation. And it was in an area in the beginning, in the hilly areas, northwest of Islamabad, which are not accessible and which still now are not accessible. And I was told that all the bridges which have been built after the earthquake have been washed away. From 50 or 53 bridges, only 1 or 2 are still there, which also shows, and apparently one bridge dates, it's a wooden bridge, which dates from the British time, which is still there. So it shows maybe also that the quality of work is something which we should look into it.
With the Pakistani politicians showing lack of leadership, the army seems to have taken control of the relief efforts. Do you think that this could herald a return to military rule in Pakistan?
Well, if things will really deteriorate much, much more, then maybe. At the moment, I don't see it. I see General Kayani as somebody who is very loyal to the political leadership and to the Americans, and who knows that it's much better that the army stays in the background politically. But the army is very effective. They have learned a lot during the earthquake. I have seen how they have improved during the course of the earthquake relief operations, and they use this knowledge now in the new operations during the floods. And I think they're doing a good job with the help also of the Americans, who sent in a lot of helicopters. And I think that's very good. And this is also something where the army can improve the standing of in the eyes of the population, of course.
You're giving quite a positive picture of the relief efforts, but the UN spokesman on humanitarian affairs, Maurizio Giuliano, said only on Monday he feared Pakistani was on the brink of what he called a second wave of death. Who are the people most affected?
Yeah, the people most affected are really the poor people who live on the countryside, the poor people who live now in southern Punjab, in Sindh, but also those tribal people living in Khoistan, Swat Valley, Kagan Valley, and in parts of the Pakhtunkhwa province, of the northwest frontier province. They are most affected, and it is difficult to get help there. But on the other hand side, the solidarity is really very strong. And I just learned now from Peshawar yesterday that schools have set up camps helping the people. Families are just taking in strangers, feeding them, as long as they belong to the Pashtuns, let's say, to the same tribe. But there is a lot of solidarity. We shouldn't underestimate it. And I don't think that everybody now is really starving to death, not yet, because help is reaching. And sometimes you have to use donkeys and you have to walk for long, long walks. And we don't know how the situation is in the very remote valleys of the mountainous areas where also floods have struck and have destroyed. The infrastructure is totally destroyed. This is the bad thing.
What would you say to somebody watching this interview and who, switching on his or her television set at night, sees these really heartrending pictures of the situation in Pakistan and would like to make a contribution? How can they be sure that the money they donate doesn't simply end up in the pockets of corrupt officials or Islamic militants?
I would say at the moment where we are still at the stage of emergency aid, this danger is not really there. But you have to give the money to those charity organizations or internationally known NGOs who already are proven in other areas of disaster that they can do the job, and you must trust them. I mean, if there is no trust, you shouldn't give the money, but the money is going actually to Western organizations, to very few Pakistani organizations, and they are doing a good job. So one can be mistrustful towards the government, of course, but I think we can also not punish the poor people who are now standing in the water, who've lost everything because they have a corrupt and bad government. So we should be on the side of the people and help them, at least in this stage of emergency aid.
Dr. Mulack, thank you very much for your insights.
You're most welcome.